Okay.
All right. Hello, and welcome to the Creative Nectar podcast. I am your co host, Jenny Hahn,
And I'm Stephanie Gray.
and we are so excited to be here with you all today for a conversation about creativity and the wisdom of the heart.
Mm.
This will be another juicy conversation we're so excited about. So much in our studio in with process art, we talk about dropping from the head to the heart, how creative expression supports this. And today we want to talk a little about what that means exactly. What is the wisdom of the heart, and why is it important? And how can creativity support that? So, are you ready, Steph?
I think so. I think so. I need to get out of my head a little bit and drop into my heart a little bit more. I've done a lot of research this morning and I'm working on that sort of head heart coherence that everyone is talking about lately. And yeah, I think I'm ready.
Yes. Well, this will be perfect then. So, yeah, I thought we could just start off by giving some definitions to what it is we're talking about. And when we talk about wisdom, first of all, what is wisdom? There's different, we've talked about this in other shows actually, that there's different forms of knowing. And particularly with wisdom, there's a difference between intellectual knowledge and deeper wisdom. And oftentimes, the intellect we think of as logic or reason, using the mind to analyze, to compare, to make predictions, to make decisions. Wisdom is a little different, right? Wisdom, at least what I was finding online, and then we'll talk about our own experiences, but wisdom is an understanding, it's insight and clear seeing, and it's associated with experiential self-knowledge. So one example one of my teachers used to give is that it's not like we're reading a menu. Knowledge could be reading a menu, like reading a book, right? Ingesting that knowledge, but wisdom is actually eating the meal, is tasting the food.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I like that example. It's based on experience, and it is it's just a deep knowing. And so when we talk about the heart, the wisdom of the heart, um, the way I define that is that deep intuitive knowing. I think Steph, you were talking about that as well, that intuition, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And as I was preparing for this, I I was thinking, what does being heart-centered mean for me? What does it mean to work with the wisdom of the heart? And I think the first thing for me is like it's not just the heart. It's like incorporating the head and the heart together. And
Mhm.
and for me, it when I'm moving from the heart, things don't necessarily make sense. Like sort of like
Right.
in a painting when we talk about process art, and I think that's why it goes hand in hand so well and why I'm able to move this sort of moving from the heart back into my actual life, into my, real world life. And there is that sense of, well, this doesn't make any sense, or well, that wouldn't that wouldn't be prudent, that maybe that's a little dicey, that's a
Right.
little on the edge. But
Right.
moving from that heart space, there's that intuitive, that knowing, like you said, that wisdom that we hold individually. So it looks a little different than everyone else's. But I think moving from that space is so vital right now. And that creativity can be such a big part of that when we're creating for creativity's sake.
Right. Right. Yeah, I found something interesting on the HeartMath Institute website, which we're going to be linking these things because HeartMath is an excellent resource for research around the heart and heart wisdom, and even the measurables around it, the electromagnetic field of the heart, which is far greater than that of the brain, and the magnetic component of it is even more. It's like, it's just, yeah, the numbers are pretty staggering. So
Yeah.
and we've talked in other episodes about how, like, the three brain theory of that, there's the head, the heart, and the gut are all considered forms of brains. And so I love that when you said that about the head and the heart together, it's really that communication, that coherence, that wholeness of the entire being, that when we're in that state where that knowing is felt. And you mentioned, Steph, that it doesn't always make sense. And that was another thing that it said through HeartMath, is that the wisdom of the heart, it bypasses the mind's egoic filters. So it may not always make sense to us, and it may not even always align with our ego's desires of self-preservation or whatever, whatever it is that we use to filter our decisions in the day to day. The heart wisdom can be almost from a greater level of knowing, and yeah, sometimes it can change everything in our lives.
Oh my gosh. I was thinking about that. Eh, Gosh, so much is running through my head right now. First, let me backtrack. What you're saying reminds me of what we were talking about the last episode that we did. What is that creative spark? And I think the heart has a lot to do with it. And you're right,
Yes.
when we do choose to move from the heart, it can like really change the entire course of your life. Like I'm just thinking for myself, there's been so many times that I have followed my heart, and it hasn't, like, it wasn't the smoothest path. We'll just put it that way. Like it had way more like interest and spice to it maybe than
Mm.
just sticking with what my brain told me to do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of my personal examples I was going to share is when we started Creative Nectar Studio, back in 2011 originally, at the time when I left my day job. I had a pretty stable job as a senior graphic designer. I had an entire community around that. I had a lot of support and seniority and security, and yet that inner nudging, and I really had to discern. It took a couple of years to finally turn in that letter of resignation, and it was this battle between my head and my heart and my gut. My gut was in there too. But my head was saying, "Oh, it's a bad idea to leave this dependable income and all of this, it's a good job and you've been here so long." And yet my heart was like, "Do it anyway. Like, my well-being, my very life depends on doing this. We are going to do this." And it was hard. It was hard to work that out. And eventually, though, I feel like if we're going to be living in alignment to our true selves, eventually the heart does prevail in one way or another. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And the interesting thing about it, and at the time, people probably thought, "Are you crazy?" But the interesting thing now, looking back, that it's been so many years ago, is that stable job and department and everything I was working in, it has pretty much all but dissolved. And the whole world has shifted since. And so it's interesting how the heart knows what we're here to do and what it want, like what we most want when we're listening to it. And yet it can be scary to follow. It can make no sense. It can turn our worlds upside down. But there is a wisdom. And when we're willing to at least listen, we don't have to upend our lives, but here's another example of how creativity can support this, because when we meet the page or the canvas or whatever we're working at, we get to practice that, tuning into the heart and listening, following it even when it doesn't make sense. And it's just a piece of paper, or it's just, maybe we're not changing our lives, but maybe we're doing something really scary at the page that feels exciting and that engages us on all levels.
Yeah, I mean, it's asking us to flex those muscles, which we've talked about a lot in here, and we begin to
Mhm.
develop that muscle memory of, okay, this is what it feels like to move from my heart. Things calm
Right.
down, there's less chatter, and it may not make sense, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Right, right. And I'm guessing some listeners might be thinking, what do we even mean by the heart? We talked about intuition, but I mean, we know the heart is an organ. We know it's essential, that it's pumping our blood and oxygen, but heart, can mean so many things. It includes our emotional state, our feelings. Some people associate heart with the soul, with the essential part of us. Um, and I also, the heart is also linked with our passions and with our compassion, our ability to feel with others, to suffer with others, to relate, to express kindness and empathy and all, um, yeah, I believe it's a connector. It's a connector to ourselves and to others, to the wholeness of the world, really.
I absolutely agree. I'm looking at my notes that I made, and one of the big ones for me was connecting to my own sense of compassion for myself, which then moved that out into compassion for others. I feel like the
Right.
self-compassion needs to happen in order to truly be compassionate for another, and then a tree, and
Right.
then a squirrel, and it's just, and that is vital for creating
Yes.
this mm, richer, more vibrant sort of world that for me is what I want to live in.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And in answer to that question of why is this important, the intellect, the rational mind has gotten us so far in our evolution and in human in technology, in the advancements that we have today. We can thank and really for our survival as animals, we can thank our brains for that. We can thank our rational minds, but it can only go so far. And we're seeing now that we are we are also on kind of the brink of our own destruction. And the mind alone, the brain alone, the rationality alone is not going to get us to where we are perhaps evolving to next. If we don't have those components of heart wisdom, of understanding, of compassion, everything you just talked about, Steph, if we don't have that connection and reverence for one another and for nature and for the planet, we're kind of doomed then.
Yeah, at the very least, what we're doing is just continuing a cycle, continuing the pattern. And, I think many of us feel, in our hearts that we're ready for something new. And this really speaks to
Right.
that. It's like, if we want something new, how do we move differently? And I may be a
Yeah.
little biased, but I feel like creativity, process art and movement and all of that helps. It's going to be one of the ways to do that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, and if we're talking about creating something new, obviously what we're doing isn't working. So, yeah, creating something new. I mean, using creativity as a practice, as a tool, is kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It's an all hearter. But yeah, so yeah, if you might be asking, like, what are some ways then to deepen into this heart wisdom? So other ways that you might hear about or read about or see is breathing, deep breathing into the heart. And we'll go into some of these later in our practices, but meditation and yoga, things like that can help. But then also, as we said, creativity is a portal for accessing that wisdom within. As we say time and time again, we drop from the head into the heart, into the body, and access that wellspring of knowledge and insight and intuition that is always available to us. It's just the creativity helps us to access it and draw it out. And there's a couple of quotes that I have that are related to this that we've talked about. Brene Brown before, the author and researcher. She says, "We are born makers. We move what we're learning from our heads to our hearts through our hands." So from our heads to our hearts through our hands, through that making or creating. And there's a similar quote that I found that the hands are the antennas of the soul, from Elena Barnabé. She's an Italian author and has these beautiful writings of speaking to her grandmother. And she talks about the importance of how the hands, making things with the hands, helps to move pain through the body and move it out. And it's the same things we talk about in here, right? I see your
Yes.
expression, Steph.
Absolutely. Well, and that's funny because I mean, we're like all about the quotes today, but
Yeah.
I was again, as I was reading more about this, there is research out there, and forgive me because I don't have the exact information, but there are a lot of people that are saying just that the hands have a direct link to the heart, so that when we are making
Mm,
things with our hands, we are connecting with the heart. And
yes.
and the thing I wanted to just briefly mention, that the thing about creating versus making art, and I don't mean to step on anyone's toes or anything like that, because whatever, but there is a difference between just making things because you're singing when you're making it, like it's like it brings you joy, or you're expressing, versus I have to create this pretty picture. And Marc
Right.
Chagall has a great quote. Basically, he said, if I create from the heart, nearly everything works. If from the head, almost nothing. And it's like, that's like that flow that we
Mm.
talk about, that
Yes.
that creative flow is heart centered. And
Yes.
so that is part of what we're talking about here, is moving from the head to the heart and the body.
Absolutely. Yes. And as I was doing my research for this, I was reminded of one of my meditation teachers mentioned this scene from the movie Dead Poets Society, which I never saw the whole movie before, but I looked up this scene, and I don't know, maybe you've seen it, Steph, but yeah, where the teacher, where Robin Williams is getting this student out of his head, and he's terrified. His ego is holding on strong, and he pulls him to the front of the room, and he's finally getting him to yell. And as soon as the kid yells, then he takes him and he puts his hand over his eyes and starts spinning him. He's spinning with him, and he's saying, "Now tell me the first thing you think of. Tell me this," and this student, who was so shelled up and in his head, just these beautiful words of poetry come out of his mouth. And he stuns himself and the whole room. Everyone who was laughing at him earlier, everyone is stunned. And I love that example of because there are ways that we can move from that egoic or that attachment to the results, creating for product, needing it to be a certain way. There are ways to kind of bypass that or move from that into a more flow state and expressive from the heart state. And
Mm.
yeah, we'll talk about some of those too, but I just love that example because I mean,
That pretty
yeah,
much sums it up, doesn't it? Exactly what we talked about in a scene, and that makes me want to watch that movie again.
yeah, totally. I'm gonna watch the whole thing now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious if either of us have any personal examples that we want to share of art making or creative expression experiences that speak to this. And it's funny to even think about really as I'm asking that, because I'm thinking to myself, well, gosh, I mean, pretty much all process art I've ever done is about that journey of moving from the egoic mind state, head space into the heart. Uh, yeah. Do you
Well,
have something you
I
wish
just
to
want,
share?
not specifically, but I wanted to agree with that, like for sure, because it was hard for me to think of specifics because you're right. It's pretty much all the process art, all that flow state. It's heart connection. But
It is.
yeah,
Mhm.
what I can share is that, even up to a few weeks ago, I'm still and continue to do so and hope to do so even more, tapping into my heart on a daily basis moving through my life. So not just,
Mm,
at the page, but making those decisions like you were talking about, quitting your job and the security and yeah, and how it just won't necessarily make sense. And as we do that muscle memory like we just talked about, it gets easier. It's a practice.
right. It is a practice. And certainly being at the page helps us to hone in on that. Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a specific story either. However, I did want to share just as I look back over my work over the years, I think it's notable of just how much of my work is heart centered, like visually speaking. And I think I've always had a sense of, well, this really ties back to when I first started practicing meditation. But practicing meditation, it was like I was able to have this visual sense of my entire form. And so I started doing paintings that were almost like what I felt inside my body, what that looked like. And so a lot of images that are kind of a silhouette with things, it was like I call it like the inner landscape of what I'm feeling. And so a lot of things with something right at the heart. One of my most recognized pieces is my painting Opening that has the doorway at the heart, which is on the cover of the Wisdom of the Shadow Oracle deck, for those of you who have that. But so many of them have that, using almost that metaphor of, to me, the doorway of the heart. It's that's what mindfulness, that's what process art, all of that does, is it takes me through the doorway of my heart, or maybe out the doorway of my heart into
Mm.
my hands and onto the page or the canvas. So yeah, I lots of lots of heart-centered pieces. And when I used to have visitors to my studio, when I used to open for First Fridays, people would speak to that, and especially those who do energy work, and they'd say, "Oh, well, you know what that means, right? Because there you did this chakra, and that means this and that color." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." you know, no, none of it was pre-planned, and I don't have the same knowledge of everything they were talking about, but it's interesting how these things are intuitively felt and known, and others can read so much into that, because the heart, yeah, the heart center is such a powerful portal for all of us.
Mm. Portal. I like that.
Portal.
The heart is a portal. I love it.
Mm.
Yeah. And we were talking before we started. I was like, Jenny, I'm always stunned how much how much heart art you have.
Heart art.
I mean, it's beautiful, and we'll be sharing some of those online on Instagram and Facebook and all of that too. So yeah,
Cool.
I'll be
Yeah.
sharing one of mine, but it's way less like it's a little heart like flipping everybody off because she's had enough.
I love that piece so much. It is so, there's so much like levity and just humor, and it's so playful and wonderful. Yeah, let's share that too.
Okay.
Oh, well, do
Well,
we want to move into our practices then for the listeners?
yeah,
Yeah.
let's do it. Let's do it. So usually I do a writing prompt, which I'll do as well today. But I would suggest, highly suggest, that when you are doing the writing prompt, before asking yourself the question, just placing a hand or both hands over the heart space and then
Mm.
breathing a couple of deep breaths, intentional breaths, and feeling your chest move up and down underneath your hand. And then ask yourself, if my heart could speak, what would it tell me? And then just writing from
Mm.
there and maybe checking in every so often in that heart
Mm.
center.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love it, and it ties in directly to the creative expression activity, which this is more about ways to, again, drop from the critical mind into the heart while you're creating and to enter that flow state. So I mentioned earlier the story of being spun by the teacher with the eyes closed, but dancing or movement, any kind of movement, dropping you into your body, can be a great way to start to move into the heart space. Also, making sound, whether it's humming or toning or screaming, yelling, roaring, um, whatever your emotional state is that matches that, but bringing that resonance and that vibration into the chest, into the vocal cords, can help to, yeah, bring to drop awareness into the body and into the heart specifically. And then moving with whatever your creative form is. If you're painting, if you're writing, if you're playing an instrument, whatever, beginning to move. But we often give the example of scribbling. You can practice shaking the body, but again, bringing the awareness out of the cerebral part and into the body. And then once we feel grounded in the body, similar to what Steph you just shared, is to symbolically hand the paintbrush, the pen, whatever it is, to the heart
Mm.
and let it express. And that's a prompt we give in here a lot
I was
is,
gonna,
yeah, if you
yeah.
can hand it to your heart, what would it create?
And it may sound really simplistic, or it may sound like it doesn't make sense, but from somebody who's done it myself many, many times, it's astounding what happens.
It really is. Yes. Because it's almost like the brain becomes a kind of a bystander, kind of just watching, the awareness can just witness what's happening, but it's not in the driver's seat. And it's really amazing and can be deeply profound
Mm,
what shows up when we really make space for the heart and for anything it might be holding, for anything it might be needing to be seen or heard or witnessed, is really, yeah, can be a really beautiful practice.
mm, mm. Yeah, boy.
Yeah.
I love this. I love that we got to talk about the heart, especially since
Yeah.
we talk about heart-centered living all the time, and I'm glad we were able to give it some space to have some thoughts about it.
Yes, yes. And we always would love to hear from you, listener, of what are your thoughts and feelings around heart wisdom?
Mm,
How does heart wisdom show up for you? Is it different from what we described? Is it similar? Did this spark any new ideas or inner knowings for you? We would love to hear, as always. We, of course, through our website, and as always, of course, if you feel led to join our Soul Nectar community, that's where we really get into the nitty gritty, juicy of all of this and get to really play around with these ideas and share very personally with each other around it.
absolutely. It takes it to a whole new level. It's just amazing,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we would love to see you there.
yes, yes.
All
All right.
right.
Do you
Well,
feel complete,
I feel
Steph?
pretty good. Yeah, my heart's doing pretty good too. Yeah. I can even
Yeah.
notice a difference from when we started to now. Like Like it's a totally different thing. So thank you again, Jenny,
Yeah.
and listeners.
Yes, thank you all for joining us. And yeah, what you just described, Steph, that's what I notice anytime we're at a workshop or painting on my own. That's a great thing to do, is to check in. How is your heart different? How have things shifted from the beginning? And yeah, I feel that too. So thank you. Thanks for being with me today. And yeah, and thank you listeners for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And until next time, be well, and yes,
From
live
our heart
live
to
from the
yours.
heart. From our heart
Yes.
to yours, live from the heart. Bye-bye.